Hello everyone, in this video we're going to look at 4 verbs that are very often confused. These verbs are somewhat similar in that they are all related to asking for things or asking for information. Okay, so we've got the verbs query, demand, require, and request. We're going to go through them one by one. So the first one is query. Query is quite a formal word. We can use it as both a verb and a noun. And when we use it as a noun, we normally use it with the verb make, so to make a query. Used in relation to a question or an inquiry of some kind. The compliance of if you make a query is quite low, so there's no necessity to respond to a query. We normally use it to ask for specific information, often in like a technical setting. So you might say, please query the database for all relevant research articles from the last 5 years. Okay. The next one is demand. So demand can also be used as both a verb and a noun. And again, if we use it as a noun, the verb is make a demand. Now, demand is quite direct. This verb is quite strong. It's less polite than the verb query, and it has a high level of compliance. Like you need to do something. If someone demands something of you, the idea is that there is a high level of obligation to respond to this. So it's quite forceful, I mean to say. Um, if you don't, if the idea as well is if you don't do something, if you demand something and the person doesn't do it, there might be some consequences as well, normally negative consequences. So you might say, the students demanded clear guidelines on their final assessments. Okay, they needed to have this information, it's an important thing. So the next verb we're going to look at, verb number 3, is request. Request is a formal word, it's quite polite. We often use it to be respectful to people, and there's not a high level of compliance expected with request compared to demand, for example. However, it is a little bit stronger than the first verb we looked at, which is query. Okay. Like these other 2 verbs, request can also be used as a noun, and again, we use the verb make with this, so to make a request. Request is often used, for example, in an academic context. If you're talking about participants in a study, you could use this verb to say participants were requested to not drink milk for 2 weeks or something like this. Now, here we can see that while there might not be any necessarily really bad consequences for the person if they don't do it, there's a moderate degree of compliance expected with the verb. But overall, we can say that it's more polite and respectful than demand, for example. The last word that we're going to look at is require. Require is only a verb. If we want to use it as a noun, then the word is requirement with a suffix. This is more connected to things that are controlled by laws or obligations or rules. Okay, so it's often used in like very formal context or legal context as well. So it's quite authoritative, but it's not necessarily aggressive. It's so you could say, for example, the university requires students to pass their thesis in order to get there, in order to graduate. Mhm. So it's an obligation, but there's no idea of like some kind of consequence happening afterwards, like there is with demand. Okay, so to summarize our differences, we can say that the words query and request are quite formal words. We normally use query to ask for information specifically, and request is a respectful way to ask people to do something. Okay, query would have a low level of compliance expected, and request would have a slightly higher level of compliance expected. We've got the word demand as well, which is more direct, less polite than the other words, and it requires a high level of compliance. And the idea with this word demand is that there might be negative consequences if something is not complied with. The final word is require, and this verb is often used in very formal or legal situations. It's not, there is no kind of negative consequences attached to this word. It's more just stating a fact that something is necessary to be complied with.